27 verse 1 and on. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. Again, this is a pronouncement of the beauty of a household in which God rules, where God gives his ways and his mind to the people of that household. And this morning I want to focus on the parents. When parents shoot straight, according to the arrows in the quiver, the children hit the mark. That is, children will succeed in life and be the kind of people God intends them to be because the parents have dedicated themselves effectively to raising godly children. And as it says, they shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. That is, even those who dislike them cannot accuse them of not being good parents. The gate was always sort of like the public square where people met to chat and do business and market and so forth. So it says there'll be no one to reproach them there because of their success in raising their children. Parenting is the most intense challenge for today's married couple. And the bonding of the parents and the raising of the children are inextricably related. They survive or fail on that principle. If the parents are not bonded and united, then the children will not grow successfully. I want to quote to you some statements on parents that you might find interesting on parenting. William Tamiya said, "You don't really understand human nature unless you know why a child on a merry-go-round will wave at his parents every time around and why his parents will always wave back." Elizabeth Stone said, "Making the decision to have a child is momentous. It is to decide forever to have your heart go walking around outside your body." And H. Jackson Brown Jr. said, "Always kiss your children good night, even if they're already asleep." And someone else said, "Before I got married, I had 6 theories about bringing up children. Now I have 6 children and no theories." And Estrida Alada, a supermodel, wrote this: "There comes a time when a woman needs to stop thinking about her looks and focus on her energies on raising her children. The time comes and the moment of conception," she says, "and a child needs a role model, not a supermodel." And in 1939, the famous psychologist C.G. Jung said, "If there is anything that we wish to change in the child, we should first examine it and see whether it is something that could be better changed in ourselves." What then are the principles for parenting that we can observe from today's text about the arrows in the quiver? First of all, barring that analogy, I want to state that the archer must be strong. And one of those signs is godliness. Godliness is the art of assimilating God's character. Did you hear that? Godliness is the art of assimilating God's character. How much like God do you look? What is your character like? It involves moral strength. Moral strength is internal, and it is obvious by the external. And it involves maturity. A man's age is something impressive. It sums up his life. Maturity reached slowly and against many obstacles. Illnesses cured, griefs and despairs overcome, and unconscious risks taken. Maturity formed through so many desires, hopes, regrets, forgotten things, and indispensable experience. Such is maturity. There must be focus, staying committed to the important things in life and not being distracted by things that do not really matter. And then there is consistency. There is an unwavering character in all circumstances. And of course, the archer must be dignified. There is an indispensable, incredible moral quality of character in the archer. That is the parent of the child. Secondly, the arrows must be straight. Ephesians 6:4 says, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." And Colossians 3:21 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." That is, the parents must shape the child. They must shape the arrow. The parent is vital in the forming of the child's character. First of all, we must begin early. The child from early childhood must have and acquire the trust factor. They must know they can trust us and that we can trust them. Secondly, the humility factor. They must see humility in our lives in order for them to develop it in theirs. And there must be the memory factor, always remembering what is truly valuable and precious in life. And then we must teach and exemplify. Teach and exemplify. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 to 9. Before the ancient Israelites went into the promised land, God had already set an order for their dedication to their families, in specific to their children. He says this, "And these words which I command you shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as signs on your hands, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." What does that mean? That God's law and God's moral law and moral law of thinking and love will infiltrate every area of life, every area of the family life. There used to be a time in America when it first began that we had what was called family worship every night during the week. And it would culminate in church worship on weekends. We must focus on modeling character. At the core of character, when you focus on modeling, you will find there's a tremendous challenge, because in order for character to be whole, to be sound, there are many elements that are involved in the ingredients that produce the type of character that will be exemplary for a godly child. At the core of it, there is contentment, there is courage, there's courtesy, there's manners, discernment, fairness, friendliness, generosity, gentleness, helpfulness, honesty, humility, kindness, obedience, orderliness, patience, persistence, self-control, tactfulness, thankfulness, thriftiness, wisdom, zeal, compassion, devotedness, and love. That's a long list. It's a lot of ingredients to put into a human soul, aren't they? Question today is, who is teaching your children these things? The schools? The government? How about television? You and only you are responsible for nurturing these qualities in the soul of your child. Most parents do not even possess these qualities themselves, including professing Christians. Parents must learn to detect and complement these qualities in their children, so that the children will understand these are qualities worth possessing regardless of what peer pressure says. We must learn to set limits in our homes. Eli, the high priest of Israel, of ancient, failed to do so, he being the leader and the prophet of the people. In 1 Samuel 3:12 and 13, when the child Samuel God had to take a child as a prophet and come to Eli and say to him, in that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. If God can judge the high priest and prophet of Israel, how do you think he sees irresponsible parents? We must assign responsibilities to our children from early, from the simplest tasks to more complex as they grow. There's a direct link between work and success. We must teach them to save money, teach them to use their time wisely, teach them to manage both wisely. We must fill our homes with laughter. Children love to laugh, especially with their parents. Proverbs 15:13 says, a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken. What does that mean? It means this: a broken spirit is doomed to failure. If you break your child's spirit, you have cursed him into failure. Let them see God's power in our homes. Let them know and understand that God rules our house. If you have not done it, take your children together and kneel before God and dedicate your home to Him. And say, Lord, every heart in this home belongs to you, and everything that is here is in respect and reverence for you. Nothing shall enter this house that does not relate to you and your holiness. We must cover them with prayer. Prayer is power. James tells us in James that the prayer of a holy man is very powerful. To never forget that. Then we must be models of leadership. 1 Timothy 3:5 instructs those who would be leaders in the church. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Sounds logical. And 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7 to 12 says, "But we were gentle among you, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children, so affectionately longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil. For laboring day and night, that we might not be a burden to any of you, we preach to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God is also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory." When you read a text like this, you can see the authenticity of the qualities of a parent. A parent has these qualities. His life is dedicated to serve God and to the success of the children in serving the Lord. He says, as a father does to his own children, so we dedicated ourselves. You find fond affection in this context. You find a transparent life. There's nothing to hide. You find unselfish diligence. I'll turn off my favorite show so I can spend time with my child reading. You find spiritual authenticity in verses 9 and 10. He said, we proclaim that teaching. He says, we exemplify. The life always corresponds to teaching. There's positive influence. And there's always availability. Always available. As the text said, do not discourage your child. It's good to see what needs to be noticed and called attention to, and you must find ways to help your child through the errors and mistakes, but do not become a critic. There's no one more destructive than a critic. If you want to find faults in anyone, it's very easy to do. But a critic does nothing for anything that is productive, especially in a child. The aim of the parents is always with purpose. You find legacy. A parent is always a parent that lives with a purpose. He finds legacy. You must understand that Christianity is generational and ultimately eternal. My faith must extend as far as it can into the lives of those who come after me. My children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and further on if possible, as long as I am in this life. Christianity leaves a legacy. There must be vision. Parents determine the direction of their children. No one else should sit down and decide what your child will be, where he will go, what she will do. You are there to encourage and teach and influence them and help them. And then you must acquire a generational perspective. Raising children includes always seeing beyond our generation. How will they influence the world they will live in? You see, God counts by generations. In Exodus 20, verses 5 and 6, when God is giving the 10 Commandments, he says, you shall not bow down to them, speaking of idols, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You see, there are tremendous consequences in what we do as parents. Parents impart influence and values that extend throughout entire generations. Parents must set goals for their task of child rearing. You cannot just let child rearing happen. It is intentional. It is planned. Parents must define their desires for their children so that they can find ways that they can help their children as they grow and mature. So we want to ask, how are you doing with your parental powers? A parent has tremendous powers. How are you doing with your power? Inherent in great power is great responsibility. Arrows are not collected, they're projected. Shape and mold your children when you have them. Protect and encourage them when you release them. Remember the opening text. They are like arrows in the hands of a warrior. They have a purpose. Learn to let go and continue to pray for them. Not to do so is to fail them. Ask the Lord to make you a spirit-filled parent and start shaping and molding your children before it's too late. You say, well, I've probably failed my children. Well, what about grandchildren? What about great-grandchildren? What about nephews and nieces? Or any child that may be put in your influence? What about them? That means that we must develop our parenting skills before it is too late. We must understand what it takes to be a parent. We live in a time where parenting is not taken very seriously anymore. We've got so many agencies and all these other entities that we can hand our children to and let them deal with it. Babysitters. Our children are our heritage. They are our future. We extend our own life and influence in the world through them. But that does not mean try to live through them. So many parents put so much pressure on children because they're trying to live through their children. I've seen so many cases where mama wants little Julie to be a ballet dancer, or Joe wants little Roy to be a karate expert, you know. Those aren't real objectives. Those are very silly ones, and they mean nothing. When a parent says, I want my child to love the Lord, I want my child to live for Jesus, I want my child to influence his own generation for Christ, that is worth the investment and the time and the sacrifice. Develop those parenting skills. If you don't know how to raise a child, take the time out to learn how. Take those courses. Get the education. Find someone older who's raised children. Learn from them. But don't just say, I don't know how, and just let the child do what it will do. No child is born civilized, and no child is born a Christian. It is our responsibility as parents to raise them. There's nothing embarrassing about improving ourselves. Absolutely nothing. So we must rethink our goals and our desires for our family often. Stop and rethink what your goals are for your family. Stop and rethink what your desires are for your family, and do that often. And then when we've done that, we must restructure our lives and our schedules for success as a parent. Now, before I move on with that, I want to make this statement. All these principles apply to being a husband, to being a wife. Because you can't be a good parent if you can't be a good wife or a good husband. They go together. And here's, I think, the comforting part of it. You can recover lost arrows. You can recover what is lost while you still live in this world. I want to share a poem with you. It's called If I Had My Child to Raise Over Again. It says this: if I had my child to raise all over again, I'd build self-esteem first and the house later. I'd finger paint more and point the finger less. I would do less correcting and more connecting. I'd take my eyes off my watch and watch with my eyes. I'd take more hikes and fly more kites. I'd stop playing serious and seriously play. I would run through more fields and gaze at more stars. I'd do more hugging and less tugging. I think it makes so many points there to those who have raised children. And I think it sets a good notice of care for those who are raising children. How are you doing as a parent? Are you willing to make those changes? Are you willing to make those efforts? No one, may I say, no one can be a successful parent if Jesus is not leading your every step. Do nothing without inquiring him first. So the question is, do your children belong to Jesus Christ today? Have you dedicated them to the Lord? Do you belong to Jesus today yourself? If you know your home and everything depends on that, why do you wait? Why don't you come to Christ